Robert for saying that is, respect, nurturing and protection. And also, thank you for giving me the opportunity. She just said I could slow it down. So if I don't finish this entire book, don't be upset. That's you're slowing it down. There you go. Slow it down. So this is your permission, and that's cool. So let's go over here to this group. I don't know what, there's two groups, okay? All right, so wherever you guys, let you decide.
I'll say something, but can't go. Hi everyone, my name is Pon.
Just speak up.
I pronounce our speakers. Again, we also brought up kind of the definition in terms of zero tolerance and how it has impacted folks of color the most. I think of three strikes laws. I think of how people are how it's been so punitive, right?
Yes.
And it hurt folks. And we often think, and I also think about for my trans folks too, when these policies come out, they hurt and they actually kill people. And we want to think about, if we think about all of our kind of repressive identities, will this type of policies hurt those who are the most marginalized, and we don't want to go there, right? So we really have to think this through. We really have to think this process. And even for me, sharing that, I had a situation on the elevator that has to do with my age, my gender, my race, for a white man to approach me and ask me about my ethnicity, are you Japanese? And the power dynamics that goes into that point. Even though I could stand up to that person and told that I'm not okay with that, and that you don't have the right to ask me or just to assume anything about me, and that I'm going to stay in this elevator to make you uncomfortable. But when I walked out of the elevator, I cried because it still impacts me. Yeah. Those are the aggressions, right? Yeah. And I hope that when we define these kind of things, that we can think about how folks are hurt by policies, but also by the systems and the powers that are in place as well. And I hope that we can develop from a place of love and accountability versus what other folks is more punitive and more out of love, And I think a lot of this stuff that people say.
I think one of the things that we said that was helpful was that, and we've already seen it reflected in what's said, is that the principles of the People's Institute can become the grounding for this definition.
Right.
All of those principles, if we use the screens of the different principles to look at what it means, then we can get at some of the pain, some of the anguish, and some of the context of history that has brought us to where we are today.
And also to not throwing people away. It was serious. We all have ways that we need to grow. If we had zero tolerance for races, there wouldn't be a white person in the room. And so we nurture each other, and we've all grown through this process, and we will continue to grow, but we have to go this way in terms of not being zero tolerance.
With listening to what we were talking about, of course, there's a lot more, and I know everybody's talking about a lot more. As we're thinking about this, I think we should also add in the fact that these policies are designed to protect people, right? And that's what they tell us. And I agree with that, but most of the people who are directly and indirectly impacted by these kinds of policies don't feel protected anyway. As she was saying just now. So when we don't have a sense of being safe anywhere, there's a lot of fervor when we get a little bit of something that we think we can do to somebody else that may skew our ability to make a clear decision about how to impose something on the people who don't want to be imposed on that. Which could, I'm just saying, that could potentially challenge how this is received within the institute. And I was offering that. That's something we're talking about too, offering that to everybody just to see what you thought.
That latter part, they break it down for a little bit more from the first.
Specifically what?
Specifically where you said we give somebody policy and then they see an opportunity to do it and impose certain things that.
Well, I'm saying there's a potential for perversion.
Right. Okay.
Because we are sometimes in the workshop, if we're doing the IRI, I'll ask people, where do you feel safe? And ultimately, people of color say, nowhere. And so we start with that when we're talking about fear. So if fear is your base, if you're living in your boot shop, you don't know what it is to feel protected. it's difficult to understand the imposition of the policy. First of all, just for you, and then how it applies to someone who may impact you. So I'm saying that I guess we should be clear how we see this as an as the People's Institute collectively before it becomes a policy for folks to adhere to, because there's that safety thing that's,
Coming from a place of protection and safety is far more paramount, coming from a position of punitive or being, as you said, looking at it from a legal standpoint.
right. But I'm just saying, I'm acknowledging that most of the people who are impacted by this don't feel safe anyway else. So a lot of that's going to come into the way we're thinking about it.
I think one of the dangers of growth is that we don't know each other. So we bring our baggage and our history and all of that's real. For all of our faults, we were small enough to learn who each other are. Now we're in a danger, even as we call ourselves trainers with the Institute, we're going to be discussing what that means. But one of the things that has always meant is that we made a commitment to each other to know each other. And that was very painful for some of us, but it is something that has led to the 40 years. So as we grow and bring in all of these other, all of us who make us now, let us be conscious that we also have to build in opportunities for us to know more about each other. We have to watch our language. For example, the term patriarchy is real, but you can't be both hunted and hunter. And men of color in this country have always been hunted. But where are we now equal with white men as men of color on the issue of patriarchy? So we have to be careful about saying, I love the differentiation between, I can't even remember what you said, but the male dominance and patriarchy. These are opportunities for us, but if we cut each other up on the beginning, we'll never get, in my opinion, to where we want to go. So we have to find ways regionally and locally, wherever we are, to really build those relationships. And not everybody's cut out to do this. Someone comes up and says, I want to be a trainer with the Institute. Well, it's more than that. So we just have to be careful as to how we grow and educate each other. As Diana said, none of us would be in the room who are white if in fact we had certain expectations on the front end. But we hopefully have learned and grown. So I just hope that we give this the opportunity, not the time, the opportunity to get to know each other, to build relationships, cross all the various lines. And at some point we might have to say, we've grown too fast. Everybody that said, I'll be a tour trainer, well, some of that was due to the economics of how do we survive, and not to your organizing history has led you to this point. So let's just take all of this in, and I think the Accountability Council is going to be key as to being honest with each other, to educate each other, and if you're making mistakes, to call those out. One of you said specifically, this is what you did, so that we can grow from it and not grow apart because of it.
So the board has focused and said that the accountability piece is important, and how you lay that out, work that out, that's, for all of you to work through. But the accountability piece, because of the growth that has happened since the Trump administration, in terms of people coming on board, wanting to train, and then the asks. I understand the asks have grown and grown and grown and grown. So the board said it's really important that we have a conversation about these issues as you grow, because if you triple your core trainer membership, right, you want everyone to be held to particular understanding of what it means around this issue, right? To be very clear about it.
If I could throw also another lens to it, that watching it as a coordinator, and I want to go back to what Barbara said about protection, we are both trainers when we're in the room, but some of us are coordinating these trainings, and what we're seeing are institutions that are not ready for this work, signing up for it, and then they already are following some of these policies. They know this language, so they're able to turn it on a trainer in a second. I felt uncomfortable when Brother Shax made a joke. And so one of us gets the phone call, and we have to deal with it, and we have to be able to navigate both, how do I protect this person I care about, and how do I make sure I can get this institution off the hands? Right? Because if not, it's going to impact every single person that goes in after that. And it's happened to every single man in here that's a trainer, particularly the black men, because we get those phone calls. And the other piece of it is that whether we go into the idea, the other piece of it that is scary for me is that those institutions are not ready to deal with the gender politic. And so when one of our trainers goes in there and says, this is my pronoun, they call us and they also say, well, do we have to follow that too? Well, yes. But are we in a position to say that? And so there's some politics stuff that's happening here that's scary because we're growing so fast. And so we both have to know the law and be able to protect our people, and at the same time hold us accountable if we do something wrong, because we all do.
I love that.
At the same time.
So that is brilliant. I didn't think about it from that end in terms of when someone accuses a trainer or a trainer of some action. In your, all of the language is very white oriented, very white driven, because it comes from the courts, which the judges are all the lawyers are white. But coming back to say that's not what X is. I have enough information and knowledge to know that's not what it is. Exactly. Right? And I'm happy to look into it for you. But be careful how you're using that language, because you're wrong. Right? And so I agree, we should look into it, but I'm not going to pass judgment just because you picked up the phone and said X, Y, Z happened.
Right.
Because now I'm knowledgeable enough to know that's not what that was. So, okay, this group over here, I'm sorry, there are 2 or 3 groups together. Okay, let's go. Okay.
So, and I'm sorry to give you my back. You know, I want to say before what we discussed is that I think about how we say racism impacts all of us, and that it impacts white people and people of color. It dehumanizes all of us. Sexual harassment does the same thing, right? And so when someone's sexually harassed, the perpetrator has dehumanized himself and dehumanized that person or herself or themselves. So I just want to put that out there. We talked about a zero tolerance policy. We started by talking about whether it's punitive, right? And if a zero tolerance is someone caused harm, it's punitive. How does it support someone's growth? Does it support someone's growth if it becomes punitive? How do we do that? That the discussion should never exclude the culture, and specifically the culture of the People's Institute. That it's a culture that we have to really talk about. There's the culture, that there's a culture of avoidance and silencing, and that creates impunity for folks too. So what we really worked on was creating like a definition. We talked about zero tolerance being, defining zero tolerance was having a culture, creating a culture, a system that has a culture which reliably supports deliberation, equity, and it allows for people to show up as their whole selves. And how do we do that? We have to create that. But it's not about the individual. It is about, we have to talk about individual behavior, but we have to talk about a culture that has been created. And that's basically what most of our conversation was, very based on cultural values and cultural norms of the organization.
So we talked about, I'm not going to repeat what folks have already said, but we talked a lot about the history of no tolerance and the impact that that's had on our communities. We talked about how do we want to inform no tolerance and what that could mean if we were to create something new and different for the Institute. One of the ideas of that was, what would it mean if we actually believe people when they say that they've been harmed, hurt, or have a situation that needs to be addressed? And so if we created a culture of actually believing people, then we would be actually, that's the no tolerance that we would be having, is no tolerance to sit there and avoid and pretend like it's not happening. And then we talked about specifically what that would look like if we have a level of transparency, vulnerability, and intimacy in the conversations that we're having to really name the hurt and the harm that's happened so the person can actually learn from it. One of the ideas that we discussed in that was we used an organizing, an example from our own organizing, specifically what using transformative justice in our organizing spaces has looked like, as different from using restorative justice, and how creating a system within our own community of the People's Institute to be able to respond collectively to issues that come up.
I would like to add that one of the things, and I want to go back to what Barbara was saying, because when you spoke to me on so many levels, because we're limited by language. We are very limited by language. But when you spoke, it landed for me in ways that resonate for me, because there's room for humanity. What happens a lot of times is that if I'm not acting right, I would think something that was said, and that becomes a left cover for me to say culture made me do it, the way I was raised made me do it, and there's something about it that we have to be struggling with, because we got to be asking ourselves to do better than we've been doing in this collective. If there's someone that believes that we're doing better than this, then say that, but I don't think that's what we are. Right, so there has to be more challenge around this, because I do men's work, and I've done men's work for most of my adult life, and I do men's work because I love men. And what I know about that is that we raise boys to become men that are not accountable because we're trying to conform to an inhumane arrangement, right, that says that. So we want a bigger piece of an unhealthy pie. And we talk about it having a different pie. Yeah. Right? And some of that was coming up for me because we're talking about intent and we're not thinking about impact. And that has to be had in this conversation.
Hello, I'm Maria, and we are mostly Northeast and Providence. We were honestly in tune with our counterparts and what you all have shared. We jotted down a few things. I'll say that the biggest parts that came up in our conversation, I think, were us not embracing the zero tolerance language because of what it has done in communities of color, but that we are embracing the language of all behaviors must be addressed. Another big thing that came up for us was the balance between not throwing people away, but also being sure that we're not engaging in protectionism by saying that. That when we say we're not throwing people away, our group said, let's really center the experiences and voices of the people most adversely impacted. We don't want to throw them away or lose them by our inaction or avoidance. And we also talked about, it was brought up. Yes, I'll read the statement that we said. Transformative justice also came up in our group as a model that we're interested in. So obviously this is not a perfect statement, but a jot down of what we said. If we were to bring this to the design team, or if we were the design team, we said, we, the People's Institute, find sexual misconduct unacceptable and out of alignment with our humanistic, anti-racist organizing principles. We do not embrace zero tolerance policies because of our anti-racist analysis and how we know that zero tolerance ideology has been weaponized against our communities of color. We do center the voices, experiences, harm, and healing of women, femmes, non-binary people, and those who are most impacted by sexual misconduct. We do emphasize the healing and support of those who are harmed within our institute with resources and human-to-human contact, following some of the principles of transformative justice.
Can I speak, P.I.?
Yes.
You know, we're talking about creating a culture. We're talking about language and how important language is. We come from a place that I feel I stepped into this work because I wanted to step into work that was about reconciliation for our families, for our culture, for the history, the entire healing. And so I look for the People's Institute to create a culture that is not existing, that needs to be existing, to be transformative for those that are dealing with anti-racism, oppression, and all of the systems and analysis that we done laid out. So when we talking about a 2020 vision, I'm looking for where we going. What can we clarify? What can we bring that's so clear, that cut through all of this mess, that many will be running after the Institute because it's much needed in our nation and in our world. And so that's what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for, we gonna create a culture that will transform our nation around this anti-racism and oppressive systems that we all been living in all these hundreds of years. Because we know we've been colonized, we know that we've been villainized, we know all of these things. History done taught us. And so where will we go now? That's what I'm looking for. When I'm looking for language and I'm saying, yeah, we created a whole brand new culture here. So that's why I said when the language is important, but I'm not going to get caught up in the language that's been oppressive all this. What we going to do? And so that thing was weighing heavy on my heart because, we started off talking about, this zero tolerance. And my little legs was having problems this morning, and I put my hand on the brother's knees, and I said, oh my God, is that even acceptable? Am I now a sex offender? Because I don't know where he at right now? I mean, we got to be careful with this language and what we say we trying to create here. And I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, so at some point, we need to move to talking about definitions, understanding that it comes from a system.
So if we say we're moving from a culture of avoidance to a culture of transparency, then these are the words that came up for us. Humanistic, okay, definition for transparency. How do we create safety for all? What does that mean? When we say liberated zone, we have a very clear understanding now about what we're talking about, and yet safety always comes up as a sidestep. So what does that mean? What is aggression? How do we compare the power dynamics that fall into these rooms? And something that Shadia said, we've been in rooms where, as trainers, we have seen this happen. We have dealt with it in the room. Okay, so what we share as a group is we mean to have a just, compassionate, humanistic process that takes into consideration, of course, the safety of the person that is speaking on whatever was identified, and that could be either the person that has felt the aggression and or someone that has seen the aggression, and that both and all will be seen through the eyes of compassion, be processing the situation through a process that will not stop at any place unless we see that there is progress being made. Stopping, removing, zero tolerance means, we're not doing much about this, but it happened, we're gonna find out what happened, we're gonna move through this, and we're not gonna take into consideration all the aspects. Now, of course, we also understand that we're human.
okay? And the humanistic aspect of this is to be determined as we go through the process, and each situation has to be seen as a situation that is the one. So there's not one, consistent policy that can be followed, but there are processes, as we say. There's no quick fix for this, okay? But there is the development of a humanistic, liberated space that can create safety for all. And what Joseph said was so important, okay? Because it's just the other side of what Barbara said, and we are about the both and. Isn't that true? Isn't that how we function? And yet we know that for some of us, that means slightly different things.
Thank you. So you were able to summarize your major points so we can get with the board and Dr. Kemp. So it is really important that you understand through the lens of the legal issues, when that behavior occurs, you must do some things. You have to take every issue seriously. You have to stop the complaint of conduct. You have to repair the situation. But what I also hear you saying is, the law doesn't take us where we need to go.
Right.
But, so we're going to add in the humanistic piece, the education piece, the loving piece.
That's right. That's right.
But there may be times when the loving may transcend to you don't belong in this community. So I think we have one more group here and then
You got a hand.
I'm sorry. Okay, right here.
To add an addenda for something like I said.
Okay.
We're family and we think alike. We do not think alike.
Yeah.
And that's where our culture comes.
Okay.
We all have a different lens, and I think that's why this is a challenging conversation.
I accept that. A comment here.
Yeah.
This is good. We just keep us. Comment right here. Yes, ma'am.
Hi everyone, I'm Angel from Providence. And I just want to name some of the, I feel paralyzed in history in this conversation a bit. And I always do, not just this conversation, but when we're talking about sexual harassment. As a black woman and as the mother of a 15-year-old black son who's way taller than me and can put his arm around my neck when he's standing up, I can't help but feel paralyzed between stories of Emmett Till, the Central Park Five, and Anita Hill. And while I want to, I completely believe in the victim, but I also know how that has worked against our black men, horribly. Yeah. So I just want to make sure that and I really appreciate what you just said about understanding patterns in systems and pathology, but also looking at situations as the situation. Exactly. And I don't really subscribe to believe in victims. I think what Barbara said was not to believe or disbelieve, but to find out. Because we've seen what happens when people just believe, specifically for white women, and what happens to our boys most specifically. So I just want to name that, because as a mom and as a black woman, I feel torn right now.
So we have one more group over here. We have two groups. Let's get to the group. Save your comments, and I'll make sure to come back. Donna, keep me on track. I'll come back to your comments. Okay, two groups over here. Please.
So I'm gonna be honest. Y'all have said so many things, and there have been times I'm like, oh, sorry. So we talked about a lot of things in our group, but y'all have talked about them better than we have. And there's definitely some things where we have been reeling. After you talk, I need a break. I need to just sit down and digest what you said, and then it's followed up by talking about root chakras and all these things. Things that we had in common, just really quickly, are talking about transparency and having a conversation that is open to everyone. Being able to talk about group accountability and support and having clear lines of accountability. And then having it be taken as seriously as theft as an actual grievance against the institution, but treated with a way that is more humane. And I think one of the things that's come up in our group and in this conversation is this idea of family. So I do a lot of work with policies and procedures. I work in HR, I work in policy analysis, and those are for institutions. And that doesn't work, for example. You don't go home for Christmas and be like, oh, what's the policy about this,
Okay,
right?
okay.
You go home and you're like, hey, how's it going, right? And like, you know what the policies are because you've been in relationship and you've been able to see how we work together. And I feel like there's a couple of people in Austin who are gonna throw some things at me after this because I've been struggling with this for a minute. So I think that the idea of having a policy is really kind of, to me, it makes sense on a growing level, but it's also a thing where like, you don't have policies for family. Like you have love for family, and you have rules for family, and even when you have to separate people out of family, like you're never in touch with them again, right? You still have love for that person, and you figure out how is it that we can still remain in relationship with those folks, but you don't throw them away.